Just last week, more than 160 faith leaders across Texas signed an open letter urging school boards to reject a new law allowing them to adopt policies to set aside time during the school day for voluntary prayer, Bible study, and reading from other religious texts. The letter comes ahead of a March 1st deadline, at which time all public school boards are required to hold a recorded vote over whether to adopt the policy. These faith leaders want schools instead to adopt an alternative resolution that affirms existing constitutional protections for student prayer without state-sponsored organization or involvement. Rabbi Joshua Fixler from Congregation Emmanuel here in Houston was among those who signed the letter. He tells Houston Matters producer Mincho Jacob that religious instruction should remain the responsibility of families and the houses of worship they belong to or attend, not public schools.
So prayer has always been allowed in schools. Students are welcome to pray. Teachers are welcome to pray in private moments because we have freedom of religion in this country. What this law does, and what's deeply concerning to its critics, including myself, is that it would allow schools to set aside time, designated time for prayer. Students would need to opt in or opt out. Parents would have to fill out a waiver. The schools would have to keep track of who has such a waiver and who doesn't have such a waiver. And it creates a whole set of problems to solve a problem that doesn't exist because, again, prayer in school was allowed. My colleagues like to say, as long as there are math tests, there will be prayer in school.
What is the problem even if it is like a non-required event sponsored by the school?
So in 1962 and 1963, there were two major Supreme Court decisions that eliminated prayer in public schools as a school-sponsored event, and also Bible study in schools as a school-sponsored event. And this new law seems to be really going back on that Supreme Court precedent that decided that those kinds of state-sanctioned prayer and Bible study moments could constitute coercion, could constitute the state endorsing one particular religion over another, and were thus found to be a violation of the First Amendment. And those were not controversial decisions in the 1960s. I think the 1962 decision was decided by 6 of the 7 Supreme Court justices at the time. Like, there was agreement that these kinds of activities were unconstitutional. And the state has passed this law that seems to me, at least, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm a rabbi, but seems to me at least to be in clear violation of that precedent, and would create a situation where students would have to choose whether to go to this prayer time, maybe a prayer being offered for a tradition that isn't theirs, or opt out of that prayer time and be made to feel separate from or different from or like they don't belong. You can imagine a situation where a student's, teacher that they really need the A from is leading a prayer in this designated time and has to make the decision whether they'd like to go and be uncomfortable listening to a prayer that isn't, or participating in a prayer that isn't their faith tradition, when they feel like there might be a chance that the teacher's more likely to give them the A if they see them there. It is absolutely going to lead to coercion, and it's absolutely going to lead to a level of paperwork and work for schools that, like, our schools and our teachers are overworked. They should be focusing on teaching the subjects that they want to teach. Administration should be focused on keeping our kids healthy and safe and well educated. And nobody needs these major hurdles that schools are going to have to go through if school districts adopt these policies.
You've joined more than 160 other faith leaders from nearly 60 school districts in opposing this law. Um, why are you speaking out now, and what are you asking school boards to pass an alternative to what SB 11 calls for?
Yeah, so the unique thing about SB 11 is that it asks that all school boards by March 1st have to positively adopt a policy that would allow for these designated prayer times. What we are asking school boards to do is to not do that, to not create this problem for themselves, to not create this potential for harm to our students, to focus on the things that we need them to focus on, because we really do think that this new law is a threat to the separation of church and state. And I think you can see from the broad diversity of faith leaders who've signed on to this letter that there is real agreement across a wide range of faiths: Jews, Christians, Muslims, people of all sorts of different faith traditions, who are saying this is not who we want to be as a state. This is not who we want to be as a country. I have congregants who are older who remember a time before 1962 when prayer in public schools was more common, who tell me stories about how uncomfortable they felt sitting in a public school classroom and listening to the Lord's Prayer, and who are grateful that our country grew out of that phase, and now understands in a more robust way the coercive impact of those kinds of moments.
You mentioned the Lord's Prayer, and Attorney General Ken Paxton in September was calling for schools to read specifically the Lord's Prayer as by the King James Bible. I'm curious as to like what gets allowed to be called, or if that's so ambiguous, and that's one of the reasons that you're calling for an alternative.
This law is a tool of Christian nationalists who want to recreate our country not as a democracy with freedom of religion and separation of church and state, but as a theocracy where they impose their religious beliefs on other people. This is part of a coordinated effort across our state and across the country to pass laws like this that chip away at the wall of separation between church and state, which is a fundamental value of our democracy. And, our attorney general said the quiet part out loud when he said, if people don't know what they should use this prayer time for, he as a state official would recommend the Lord's Prayer as given by Jesus Christ. That was his language. The Lord's Prayer is certainly not something that's a part of my tradition as a Jew. It's not a part of lots of people's tradition. And that is the government putting its thumb on the scale and saying this is a faith tradition that we think is more important or more authentic or more American, whatever that message is that they're trying to send. And students are going to receive that message. Students are going to hear that loud and clear. And that's not who we are. That's not what we stand for as a country. I am a rabbi and I'm a public school parent. And I believe deeply that I want my kids to learn the things that are going to make them good citizens, the things that are going to make them good and productive members of society. And I'd like the public schools to leave a religious education to me and my congregation for our kids.
Do you feel that schools should be completely secularized? Should there be any mention of religion or time given to that at all?
So, so religion is an important part of our society, and we have a diverse society with people of lots of different faiths. And so there is absolutely a place for the teaching about religion in public schools because that is a part of our society. But there is a big difference between teaching about religion and teaching religion. There's a big difference between sharing about the diversity of our country and all the different faiths that people practice so that people can understand and be better neighbors and better members of a civic community. That is fundamentally different than teaching a religion as if it is the most correct faith and implying implicitly or explicitly that other faiths are less than. And so I don't want my elementary school age children getting their religious education at school. I want them getting their religious education in my home and in my congregation. But I do want them to learn about the diversity of their community.
And if a student is in a school district that does pass a policy that allows for a very specific reading of these texts and a certain type of prayer, what recommendations do you have for families and for students in navigating that, especially as they may feel themselves ostracized?
Well, I think right now we're really focused on making sure that school boards know that Texans don't want this, Texans of faith don't want this, that they don't need this. There's a great Yiddish word, surus, which means, pain and difficulty. They don't need this surus in their districts. And so that's our focus right now. I think families that end up in districts that do have these policies are going to have to then encourage their schools to make choices that are reflective of the broad diversity of those schools, to make decisions that are reflective of the separation of church and state that's at the center of our democracy. But for right now, we're focused on preventing harm by helping school boards avoid passing these policies.
How would you like to see the discourse change or be added to?
we have seen an incredible rise in Christian nationalism and people who are now unafraid to say some things that maybe they were thinking in their heads a decade ago, but now they get to say proudly, like the lieutenant governor saying that people should be offering the Lord's Prayer as given by Jesus Christ in schools. That is just so clearly a violation of the intention of the First Amendment and the freedom of religion that we have in our country. And so I think people need to learn more about what Christian nationalism is and how it operates and take it seriously. It's something I've been encouraging in my congregation. We've done some study of some books about Christian nationalism. We need to understand how it works, understand how all these things that feel maybe separate are actually connected. And all these different bills that are working their way through the Texas legislature are really part of a coordinated effort to undermine the separation of church and state. And I think we need to call it out. We need to call it what it is, which isn't just a random law about prayer in schools. It's a law about undermining the wall of separation between church and state, and in an effort to fundamentally change America's freedom of religion and, by extension, its democracy.
That's Rabbi Joshua Fixler from Congregation Emmanuel. He spoke with Houston Matters producer Mincho Jacob.